The Murder of Joyce Malecki, The River Horror, Shadows on the Riverbank. Subscribe now, before the river drags another soul under. The November air was sharp and unforgiving when two brothers stumbled through the woods along the Patuxent River. It was supposed to be a quick hunting trip, but the forest carried a silence that gnawed at them. The usual chatter of birds was gone, replaced by a muffled stillness, as though the trees themselves were holding their breath. The younger brother spotted it first, a piece of white fabric snagged on a thorn bush near the water. Curious, he pushed closer. What he saw made him choke on his words. A woman's body, face down, half submerged in the river, her clothes torn, her hair matted with mud and leaves. The water lapped against her skin with a sick rhythm, almost as if the current itself wanted to pull her deeper. The brothers froze, too horrified to move. That body was Joyce Malecki. She had been missing for 2 days. A 20-year-old who had gone Christmas shopping, her plans cut short by a horror no one had expected. But here she was, thrown into the river like a discarded secret. Investigators arrived quickly, their flashlights cutting through the mist, but nothing could prepare them for the scene. Joyce's throat bore the jagged marks of a blade. Her neck showed the unmistakable bruises of strangulation. Whoever had done this had wanted her silent permanently, but the strangest detail wasn't the violence. It was the setting. The Patuxent River snaked dangerously close to Fort Meade, a military installation. Soldiers in uniform stood uneasily on the banks as detectives dragged the body out. And there, in the distance, the faint shape of an abandoned chapel loomed in the trees, dark, windowless, and wrong. Even the most hardened officers refused to go near it. The case was supposed to be straightforward: track her. Final steps, question witnesses, find the man who had followed her. But the deeper they looked, the stranger it became. A fisherman swore he'd seen a shadowy figure standing waist deep in the river the night Joyce disappeared. He thought it was another angler until he realized the figure wasn't holding a rod, it was holding something that glinted like a knife. When he blinked, the figure was gone, leaving only ripples. That wasn't the only story. Local children whispered about the river man, a figure they claimed stalked the woods, his face always hidden in shadow. Parents brushed it off as folklore, but the discovery of Joyce's body made the whispers take root. Some said the river was cursed. Others swore the chapel nearby was where they'd brought women, never to return. And the police reports, these stories were dismissed. But the detectives felt it, an oppressive weight in the woods, an unseen set of eyes watching them from just beyond the tree line. One officer claimed his radio picked up a strange signal as they carried Joyce's body out. It wasn't chatter from dispatch. It was a low, guttural whisper repeating a single word: stay. They laughed it off in front of each other, but when night fell, none of them dared patrol the area alone. Still, the investigation pressed forward. They searched the banks for evidence, but the mud yielded little. A footprint that led nowhere. Fibers that matched nothing. And carved faintly into a tree trunk near where Joyce was found, a cross, etched crudely as though by a shaking hand. By the time the crime scene was cleared, the woods had reclaimed their silence, but a week later, a detective returned to the river alone, hoping to piece together the timeline. He followed the bank where the body had been discovered, flashlight beam shaking. He stopped at the tree with the cross carving. Only now, there were more marks. Fresh ones. Dozens of crosses clawed into the bark, dripping with sap like open wounds, and just as he turned back toward his car, his radio crackled alive. Stay, the same whisper, deeper this time. The detective froze. The river's surface rippled though no wind stirred. Then, he saw it, a figure standing waist deep in the water, exactly as the fisherman had described. Its head tilted unnaturally, staring at him, but when he blinked, it was gone. The next morning, that detective's flashlight was found abandoned by the riverbank. He never filed another report. The chapel in the woods, the town of Glen Burnie had always whispered about the river, but after Joyce's body was found, the whispers grew louder. Mothers pulled their children closer at dusk, locking doors earlier than ever before. Hunters avoided the woods entirely. And every rumor, every frightened word, led back to one place: the abandoned chapel by the Patuxent. Investigators dismissed it at first. It was just a crumbling, forgotten relic from decades earlier, a small stone building overtaken by vines, its windows shattered, the bell tower leaning like a crooked finger. But the locals knew better. They called it the place where voices linger. When detectives returned to the river for another sweep, one of them suggested they finally take a look inside. The others hesitated. Even armed, the building radiated a chill that felt older than stone. But procedure demanded it. The door groaned open with a sound that echoed like a scream. Dust and rot filled the air. A once proud altar stood cracked at the center, its cross broken and toppled sideways, as if abandoned mid-sermon. Rats scurried along the pews. But the most unsettling detail was the walls. Symbols were scratched into the stone, overlapping crosses, circles, jagged marks that looked burned into the surface. Some of the symbols dripped, though no one could say with what, and at the far end, hidden behind a splintered door, was a narrow stairwell leading underground. Two officers refused to go further, muttering excuses about evidence collection. The remaining pair pressed on, their flashlights bouncing across the walls as they descended. The stairwell ended in a damp chamber carved from the earth. The smell of river water was suffocating. And in the corner, a pile of women's shoes, covered in dirt, swollen with age. The investigators gagged. There was no logical explanation. The shoes were all different sizes, different styles, some rotted beyond recognition, others looking eerily recent. One officer reached for his radio to call it in, but static exploded through the speaker. Beneath the hiss, a voice whispered, "She's ours now." The officer dropped the device, his pulse hammering in his throat. His partner raised the flashlight higher, illuminating the damp wall above the shoes. Words were scrawled in black, uneven strokes, "Stay out of the river." They bolted, stumbling back up the stairs, but when they shoved the chapel door open, the woods outside had changed. The air was thick, suffocating, the trees impossibly still. Not a single sound. No wind. No insects. Just silence, and then, from the riverbank, came a splash. At first, it seemed small, like a stone tossed into the current. But the ripples grew wider, reaching all the way to the chapel's edge. A shadow rose from the water, long and thin, standing upright as though the river had given it form. The officers didn't wait to see more. They ran, stumbling through the forest until they found the road. When they finally returned with backup hours later, the chapel looked exactly as it had before, empty, broken, harmless. The underground chamber, the shoes, the writing, all gone. The shaken officers swore it was real, but their reports were buried under insufficient evidence. Yet the legend of the Riverman spread like wildfire. Teenagers dared each other to walk the banks at night. Parents begged police to search deeper. And the investigators who stayed on the case began to notice a pattern. Every time they tried to move closer to answers, something, or someone, pushed back. Radios cut out. Evidence disappeared. Witnesses changed their stories, and then came the worst discovery. 2 weeks after Joyce's body was found, another woman vanished. Her car was discovered abandoned near the woods. Door ajar, keys still in the ignition. Pinned beneath her windshield wiper was a page torn from a Bible, smeared with river mud. Across the page, a single word was written in shaky red letters. The Riverman's claim. The second disappearance shattered what little calm remained in Glen Burnie. Joyce Malecki's death could no longer be dismissed as a tragic, isolated crime. Something was stalking the river. Something that did not want to be disturbed. The FBI was called in. Agents in dark suits combed the banks with dogs and equipment, their radios buzzing with clipped voices. But even they felt it, the atmosphere pressing down on them, heavy and wet, as if the river itself was holding its breath. One agent muttered under his breath that it felt like standing inside a throat about to swallow. When they forced entry back into the chapel, this time with cameras and evidence techs, they found the underground chamber again. Only now, it was worse. The walls were covered in fresh symbols, hundreds of them carved deep into the stone. In the center of the chamber lay a pool of water, though no pipes ran there. The pool rippled, even though the agents made no movement. And floating at the edge of the pool was a small silver crucifix, later confirmed to have belonged to Joyce Malecki. An agent reached for it, but the water surged upward in a violent splash. His flashlight shorted out instantly, plunging the chamber into darkness. In that black silence, everyone heard it, a low gurgling voice, rising from the water, whispering the same word the officers had heard before, "Stay." The team scrambled out, dragging their colleague with them. Cameras later showed nothing but static during the incident, though their audio picked up the faint sound of rushing water long after the chamber was empty. The FBI closed the site to the public, fencing off the chapel and the stretch of riverbank where Joyce was found. But sealing a place does not seal its presence. Locals began reporting strange phenomena. At night, screams echoed from the trees. Drivers swore they saw a figure standing in the middle of the road, dripping wet, vanishing before headlights struck. And those who walked too close to the river told of hearing splashes behind them. Though the water lay still when they turned, the disappearances stopped, but the fear did not. The chapel became a place no one dared enter, the woods avoided even in daylight. Joyce's case remained unsolved, her killer never identified. Yet the town whispered its own verdict. She had been claimed, like the others, by the riverman, and then, years later, a final chilling detail emerged. A group of urban explorers broke into the chapel, filming themselves with handheld cameras. The footage, later leaked online, showed them laughing as they descended into the chamber. The laughter stopped when they found the pool. The water rippled. One explorer leaned too close. A pale hand shot up, grabbing his wrist. The footage cut to static. When police searched the chapel days later, they found no explorers. But etched into the wall, freshly carved and dripping, was a new set of words: she was first. He was next. Who is last? The chapel has been sealed ever since, the river patrolled but never explained. Joyce Malecki's name still haunts Maryland, her murder a reminder that some crimes leave scars deeper than any blade, and on quiet nights, if you walk the banks of the Patuxent, some swear you can still hear it, the water whispering, slow and deliberate, "Stay." If you thought this story was terrifying, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it.